Hi, I'm Irving. You have just entered Cartertopia.
So, you can clearly read the movement on the seismograph, gentlemen. It's recording movement in the Earth's crust. A small movement, but a movement that I have induced.
We're using controlled explosions to trigger many fault lines in the ground below them and induce a man-made earthquake. These are microscopic, of course, because we're using small explosives, but bigger ones in the right place could cause untold destruction. 9 years later, Richard Malbaum and Michael G. Wilson would steal this idea and use it as the plot for A View to a Kill. But they're good guys. Why do they want to create earthquakes?
The scientist is never satisfied until the final step. Our ultimate goal is to control and eliminate earthquakes, not create them.
You're trying to eliminate earthquakes by inducing them. Isn't that a bit like saying I have sepsis, so I'm going to drink some stagnant pond water to cure it? Well, no. It comes back to physics, although they never really explain it in the episode. The idea is that if there's an earthquake happening over here and it's putting out rippling energy waves, creating one over here and sending its waves that way will cancel out the energy of the original quake and make it settle down a lot quicker than it would on its own. I know some research has been done into this, but I couldn't tell you by whom or what the current status is. For our purposes here, it doesn't matter. What does matter is, what if this falls into the wrong hands?
A handsome cab ride in Central Park, chestnut vendors in Times Square, the whole world spread out before you from the top of the Empire State Building. Yes, even in this terrible war, New York can be a very lovely and romantic place.
Those can't be the wrong hands. That's Robert Reed, the dad on the Brady Bunch. If you can't trust the guy whose TV married to Florence Henderson, who can you trust? They try to detain him at customs, whereupon he tells his girlfriend to pull some strings with the Irish embassy and raises a big fuss.
We've just gotten a call from passport control at LaGuardia Airport in New York. A man fitting the description of a major enemy agent has gotten through customs. They believe it's the notorious international mercenary we call the Falcon.
And the name he was traveling under is Fallon. 0 points for imagination. Again.
The Falcon? Well, how could he get through customs?
Well, they tried to detain him, but he was traveling on a neutral passport.
Did they have time to put a tail from military intelligence on him?
Not enough time, apparently. He slipped by them, too.
The woman he was with is named Camilla, and as far as anybody can tell, she's an innocent dupe who has no idea who he really is. While they're trying to sort all this out, the Falcon has managed to penetrate security at the scientific facility where the professor is working.
Now, the integral between the limits of x1 and x2 equals...
Professor Warren?
Oh, is it dinner time already?
Yes, it is.
He's too preoccupied to notice the soldier's accent, but he does notice when the orderly takes a little too much interest in his research.
I said your conclusions are fascinating. The study of the Earth's crust, how natural forces can manipulate it, how man can manipulate it.
Just who are you?
I represent an interested party, Professor. A very interested and wealthy party.
He draws a silenced pistol and demands the Pluto file. He says he'll pay a cool $1 million for it. The scientist says it's not for sale and neither am I.
Sergeant!
Yes, sir.
The Falcon prevails. He stops the professor from calling for more help and hangs up the phone. He probably shouldn't have done that. In the aftermath, Steve and Diana confirm that the Pluto file is missing. The professor's assistant, Charles Benson, is on his way to see what else might be missing. One big question is, how did the mercenary know about the Pluto file, what it would look like, and where to find it? Guess what? We have a leak. But back at the War Department, Etta has some even more disturbing news.
Oh, General, am I glad I found you. This just came in. It concerns the all-points bulletin you put out on Camilla Moret.
She's been found?
She's in a hospital in New York, in the isolation ward.
Well, what's wrong with her?
What is it?
She's got bubonic plague.
I wonder how she contracted that. Well, as we go along, we learn that the Falcon was just in India, where a man who was in contact with him has come down with the plague. Before we know it, there are more cases around Washington and elsewhere. Looks like the Falcon is his own version of Typhoid Mary. At the hospital, Diana heads up to try and talk to the professor and see if they can identify the Falcon. But before she goes, she has to get inoculated. She's never had a shot before. Well, not the injection kind, the bullet thing is... It's a nice touch to have her reacting to it like a regular person. Little things like that add up to good characterization. In the professor's room, she suddenly discovers the Falcon across the street, and he's got himself a brand new sniper rifle. And if he got a good look at her pre-transformation face through the scope, he can now figure out who Wonder Woman is. Doing that right in front of the window doesn't seem like a great idea if you want to keep your identity hidden. At least close the curtains first.
Here is the target.
Near Bladensburg, Maryland. 15 miles from the capital.
Very tidy. Benson, what do you estimate the radius of the destructive force will be?
And we have our predictable leak, the professor's assistant, Charles Benson. If you couldn't see that coming, turn in your magic lasso.
Steve, there has to be a leak somewhere about the Pluto project. Perhaps we've overlooked something in Benson's alibi.
Charles Benson.
And Steve has already learned to trust the insights of a woman because there's a 99 and 44/100% chance she's way smarter than he is. At the Institute, the gentleman in question isn't doing so well.
I remember picking up the phone and his arm around my neck, and then suddenly all went blank. Charles, are you all right?
I must be catching a cold, that's all.
Somebody's got the plague. Steve and Diana are buying the cold explanation about as much as we are. She goes to bring the car around while Steve tells Benson, "Come with me." Benson resists.
We're tracking a man infected with bubonic plague. You may have picked it up.
But how? Charles had no contact with the thief.
Not during the robbery. But the thief that you described could very easily be the man that we're looking for. You have been in contact with the Falcon, haven't you?
Apparently it's better to die of the plague than get treated and face the music later. You know, when you're still alive. He makes a run for it just as Diana arrives with the car. Unfortunately, he collapses and loses consciousness before the lasso can compel him to tell her where the Falcon is. We know the target is near Bladensburg, Maryland. The Falcon and his henchmen are on their way there now.
How much farther to Bladensburg?
It's only a few miles. But the gas tank's nearly empty.
To assume you didn't fill it up before we started?
Everything's rationed.
He doesn't look so good. They stop at a gas station where he pours as much water into himself as he does into the radiator. They drive away and the attendant casually takes a drink from the hose.
It seems like it's right in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. Precisely why the Americans chose this spot for one of their experimental atomic reactor laboratories.
The plan is to put explosive charges in a ring on tiny fault lines around the facility. Setting them off will trigger an earthquake that will destabilize the reactor and cause it to explode. That explosion will trigger an earthquake that will basically devastate Washington, D.C. And nobody knows that this is the Falcon's target.
Another case of bubonic plague has been reported.
Where?
Well, the patient's being taken to Walter Reed so that Dr. Barnes can look after him personally.
Where was the patient when he became sick?
Small town not far from here, Bladensburg, Maryland.
Bladensburg. Well, General Blankenship asked us to meet him at a top security installation in that same area.
What a remarkable coincidence. And you wondered why I mentioned him drinking from that hose. They decide to stop by the hospital and see if the gas station attendant can talk. He manages to say they were definitely headed for Bladensburg.
Excuse me, General, but is there any connection between this installation and the Pluto project? Could that be why the Falcon is in this area?
There's no relationship between the two experimental projects whatsoever. But if the Falcon is trying to join the two, then a great many lives could be in grave danger.
Looks like the general put it together, without either Diana's or Etta's help. He's improving. Oh, wait, the whole idea came from Diana's question. Never mind.
741 is part of the Manhattan Project. It is a stationary laboratory, a cyclotron reactor that fuses uranium and plutonium atoms. The result is a form of energy we don't yet know how to control.
But we're making a bomb out of it anyway.
At exactly 5 miles from that reactor, we've sufficiently ringed the perimeter with explosives. That should be just enough force to squeeze the Earth's crusts and shift the ground between that cyclotron reactor.
Between that cyclotron reactor and what? You can't be between one thing. Europeans talk funny. The General and company have been examining that reactor.
Sir, we've doubled the guard around the site perimeter.
Oh, very good, Steve.
We're activating the core so we can't stop the experiment for 24 hours.
Who wants to bet the Falcon knows that? So if he starts his quake while the system is powering up, they can't stop it and the explosion is inevitable. And that's pretty much what happens. The Amazons on Paradise Island told the story of how Diana was vaporized for the next 1,000 years. Actually, that is pretty much what happens, except for the explosion. Diana suddenly realizes what the Falcon is likely planning and makes her excuses to get away by herself. Steve insists they have to shut the reactor down. The scientist says, "We can't." President Roosevelt, by phone, says, "Yes, you can." They decide to flood the reactor with liquid coolant.
Now that we've got the explosives started, the tremor should progress with increasing force over the next 8 hours.
There isn't anything anyone can do about it.
But in point of fact, Frank, you're wrong. There is one person who might be able to stop it.
Wonder Woman.
America's foremost seismologist, Professor Warren.
Oh, right, him too. But the Falcon gets 2 for the price of 1 because Wonder Woman is at this very moment assisting Professor Warren to find a countermeasure. Plus, Steve has a buttload of Marine guards around the place.
When that guard gets to the back of the Institute building, you head for those bushes. You'll have at least 20 seconds. That'll give you plenty of time.
Yeah, I can make it.
Yes, that should be enough of a diversion to let me get to that rear door.
All those guards, all that barbed wire top fence, and there's a totally exposed rear door that nobody's accounting for. Your 1942 tax dollars at work.
And once I'm inside, I'll be able to finish our business with a good professor.
Don't forget Ginger and Mary Ann. He makes his run, but he's too sick to escape. While Wonder Woman tends to him and tells the guards to stay back, Falcon makes his entrance into the building. Wonder Woman heads back in to watch over the professor. Just as they find the solution to the problem, they run out of chalk and Wonder Woman goes into the storeroom to get more. I think we all know what happens next.
You see, Professor Warren, I hate loose ends. And I'm very much afraid you're a loose end. And you as well, Wonder Woman.
You know that's useless, Falcon. Your game is over.
That entrance was anticlimactic. I expected her to come in just in time to deflect another bullet. But right now it doesn't look like the Falcon has the strength to pull the trigger. He's coughing, sweating, his voice is gone, and his hands are shaking.
Your own life is in danger. If you don't let us help you, you will die. You have bubonic plague.
You expect me to believe that?
It's never a bluff. Know your TV tropes, Falcon. It's never a bluff.
2 weeks ago, you were in India.
Yes, perhaps.
There was an outbreak of the plague in India exactly then. You're a carrier. You've already infected 3 people so far that we know of, including Camilla Moret.
That got his attention. She's an innocent, and he actually kind of likes her. The thought that he hurt or even killed her stings him a little.
Perhaps this is useless against you. But these chemicals are not.
That's a nice bit of irony. The quake he caused brings his downfall. Back at the reactor, the special coolant isn't doing the job. The professor suddenly says, "Duh, the coolant is too complex. Use water, plain old water." It works and the reactor is safe. They ride out the earthquake with minimal damage and all is well. It's easy to sit here over half a century later and second-guess things like the Manhattan Project and President Truman's decision to use it. We weren't there. This episode does a little exploration into the whole "just because we can doesn't mean we should" controversy, and it doesn't really draw any conclusions. It shows the downside, talks a lot about the potential upside, and lets us decide. This show got some flack for having a bit of fluff, but one thing it did not do is insult your intelligence. It got the wheels turning on topics like this one, and most of the time we didn't even realize it. It's brilliant. I am Irving, and you are now exiting Cartertopia.